This is Point Blank and welcome to KTN News. My guest today is an eminent economist and a man who's known to say it as it is. In order to know my guest today, let's look at what he has done before.
David Ndii is Managing Director of Africa Economics. He served as a technical advisor on public finance to the Committee of Experts. He previously worked as economic advisor to the President of Rwanda, chief economist for Equity Bank, an economist with the World Bank, and taught at the University of Nairobi. Ndii was the pillar of the NASA campaign against Jubilee in the position of a strategist.
David Ndii, rafiki yangu, and welcome to Point Blank.
Good to see you again, Tony. Good to see you after quite a bit, a while.
I'm sure Kenyans today are going to hear on a number of areas that David Ndii can comment on. But I wanted David to start with this issue of corruption. There is a feeling that Kenya is almost ungovernable, that somehow Kenya has reached a point where corruption has consumed the entire state. Across all the institutions of government. Has Kenya collapsed in terms of its ability to deal with this monster?
Thank you very much, Tony, for inviting me to reflect on some of these difficult questions. As it happens, I came across something I was reading last week. It was in reference to South Africa, written by by a Canadian journalist, I think. And he was asking the question, is South Africa governable? And it was in the context of the same thing happening there. You're aware of these state capture, Gupta scandals, collapse of ESCOM, all that sort of thing.
State capture, land without compensation.
The Gupta scandal and Zuma, Gupta, all that maneno. And he wrote the following. He said, asking, what is a governable country? Let me read it for you. A governable country is one in which level of trust and common feeling run high. It is when people believe they are in the same boat, their destinies mutually entwined, that they make sacrifices for one another. When nobody trusts anybody, we all grab what we can here and now. To defer anything to the future is to put one's fate in the hands of strangers.
I mean,
you grab here and now because there is no trust in society. In other words, the social contract, if you had one, is sort of frayed. It's not new. We have been moving in this direction for a very long time. We tried to correct it. Starting in 1992 with multi-party, the new constitution, all sorts of things, the NAC sort of movement, what we tried to do, 2017 with NASA.
Yes.
And what it's been doing is eroding the social capital that holds people together.
In countries where David, in countries where you have forceful takeover of government, you talk about political coup d'etats by the army. Mm-hmm. Sometimes sitting in Kenya, reading the headlines and watching the Chief Justice, watching the Director of Public Prosecution, watching the President, you feel as though they are hopeless, helpless almost, to an extent that they are asking wananchi. Sometimes they tell wananchi, and I ask, what do they want wananchi to do? Are we in a state really of the monster of corruption, having done a coup d'etat?
It's not monster of corruption. Don't call it a thing. It is leadership failure. Okay? The people who are talking like that are the people who have failed to build a nation. Yeah? So what's happened is they have failed to build a nation, yeah? And what you're seeing now is the blowback, yeah, of what is ungovernability. You cannot govern people if they are not willing. What you're seeing is people withdrawing. Yeah, the legitimacy, there's loss of legitimacy. So you have a rudderless leadership. Yeah, it's a nation, it's a state whose leadership has been going down.
Intellectually, David, there were problems when the ICC came into the country, because many think that at least this government came into being because of the ICC compromise. Do you feel that that compromise of the ICC was too expensive to make, because whatever came after it was never going to be able to handle the matters government?
Let's go back to the beginning of that problem. We need to go back to 2003, NAC, MOU, yeah? The abrogation of the MOU, yeah? NAC was elected on a platform of new constitution, new political dispensation. We got into office because it's us, and then the old guard, the status quo, they coalesced around Kibaki, subverted the agenda of political dispensation, brought back the agenda of development and business and all sorts of things. That led to 2005 referendum, created a very toxic political environment. That led us to 2007 election and the election fiasco and the post-election violence and the National Accord and the new constitution. Then by then, remember, the ICC is an outcome of that particular toxicity of the 2007 election. True?
Correct.
So the new constitution, we get a new constitution in 2010, but it is midwifed in that kind of toxic environment. One of the mistakes we made is we did not have an election immediately after 2010 constitution. Because if we had had an election, the people who are champions in this progressive agenda would probably have taken over. But our misfortune is that we put it in cold storage, okay, allowed the old forces to regroup behind the ICC, behind this ICC toxicity, because they could mobilize ethnically and all other sort of things. And so we end up in 2013, the first thing we do is throw Chapter 6 out of the window.
Yes, that
okay?
is, yes.
We throw Chapter 6. Once you throw the integrity chapter out of the window of the Constitution, so what we did is that we set the bar, that this is the bar for public leadership. We set a high bar in the Constitution. Instead of jumping over the bar, we went under the bar.
A lot of people say that through the coalition government and toward the new government of 2013, that there was also a change in the civil society, because many of the voices of reason were either absorbed as politicians, others put into pro-government commissions, that somewhere even the voice of the people, so as to say, has been silenced for a while, that there seems to have been, the last 10 years, some kind of slowdown. For example, if today somebody was saying that we are talking about billions of shillings being stolen by one person, and every time that person being named, in the old days there would be demonstrations, there would be street action, there would be other actions taken by those not in government. There's a kind of allow.
Look, I don't think that's the reason that happened. I think the reason that happened, because it's I'm one of those civil society people, is working so hard to bring that new constitution. I worked on it myself. In fact, we began the constitution, putting the constitution on the political agenda around 2006. I remember the first sort of conversations we had with people like Willy Mutunga and Kivutha Kibwana and people like Munuve and Kamau Kuria and all sorts of other people. I remember us having a workshop in Narumoro and deciding that we're going to try and make a new constitution a part of the political agenda. And then we achieved that. You know, we push that agenda through NAC, And then, of course, the old guard says it's not the Constitution, the problem was Moi, and they go back to their old ways. 2007 brings the issue right back onto the agenda. So we get the new Constitution in 2010, and then the citizens of Kenya get mobilized around ethnicity and injustice, defending injustice, yeah? And they trample on the Constitution. I'll tell you, that took the wind out of the sails.
That in addition to the fact
that
we rewarded tribalism.
Yeah.
David, you know well, we've had many discussions with you and the late Apollo Jonjo on this subject. We created counties, 47 counties were created, most of them ethnic chiefdoms. We also created MCS. What I'm saying is, was the 2010 Constitution also a vehicle of bringing so many people into the pot, that so many people are eating and therefore...
No, not really. Listen, let me go back to the point I was making and then come back to your point, because that's the counter-reformist narrative that you are now bringing, okay? The people, I included, who are saying the civil society who used to champion all these things, who've done all this work, myself, John Githongo, Maina, K.I., Gladwell, Otieno, what happened, Muthoni Wanyeki, what happened to us? When the ICC narrative came along, we were labeled evil society. And people turned against us, okay, for fighting for justice, for standing up for the victims of the PEV. Yeah? So if your society turns against you for doing the right thing, what do you do? Yeah? What do you do? So it's not that people got absorbed in government. It's that we sort of said we got back that sort of kick in the face, and we backed off and said when Kenyans are ready, but you cannot proceed without justice.
And I want
so let me come back to the Constitution.
Yes, and how it...
First of all, you have to, the framework you're coming from is one which is informed by a very developmentalist view of the state. The purpose of the state is not development. The purpose of the state is governance. Okay, that's his first duty. Okay? And the fundamental problem of this country is that the state we have is an administrative state. It's not a political state. Because the colonial government set up an administration. It did not set up a political system because they did not want. So what you've had is an administrative state sitting above the people.
It began during the colonial.
Yeah, instead of the people,
counties, yeah.
Instead of the people being the ones, the people sort of establishing the state. So so what we tried to do over the years, and particularly with the new Constitution, is to transform Kenya from an administrative state to a political state. Now, we have to decide when you talk about a political state.
I need to bring you back.
Let me come to it.
Yes.
Subsidiarity is very important. That the decisions should be made closest to the people. Okay, to the people, whatever. So you ask, what unit should form the state? So we are quite clear that a big problem of our state is over-centralization. So if you're going to decentralize the state to devolve power, to what units are you going to devolve power?
And David, these intra-Jubilee wars we are seeing, the headlines of every day, that there comes in Jubilee targeting the deputy president and his people. And they are, in fact, the arguments that there is a new Tanga team and all these things. Are you saying these are manufactured wars and they are non-existent? Or are you saying that all is, is this Uhuru shooting himself in the head as opposed to Uhuru being shot at by people within?
We knew from the outset that Jubilee was a marriage of convenience to fight the ICC. So as soon as the ICC ended, this fallout has been coming a long time. In 2015, Uhuru went to Parliament waved a piece of paper with all sorts of people on it, and he said he was going to fight corruption. True.
They sweep clean the broom.
Sweep clean, all sorts of things.
Charity Ngilu.
All sorts of things, yes. And where did that go? That faltered. At that time, I wrote about 3 editorials, op-eds, on that particular subject. And I want to remind you what I said in one of them. I told Uhuru he has 6 options. Yeah? And I said, look, for the same reasons, you lowered the bar. We threw out chapter 6. And then you turn around and you say, and remember, they had already been interfering with the EACC at the time. Okay? So this is what I said. I said you have 6 options. 1 is to declare victory and get out of there, which is to do PR. 2, call a ceasefire. 3, dispense with the proxy war, fight Ruto politically, if this is about fighting Ruto. 4, actually fight corruption. But the problem with fighting corruption is that you have a problem of re-election because you are on an impunity ticket and all your supporters are basically, it's a corruption platform basically. Alternately, if you're not going to do that, do not seek a second term, and then you can fight corruption without being conflicted with re-election objectives. 5, transcend corruption and actually adopt the broader reform agenda. And the other one was do nothing. But I want to read exactly what I said about number 5, how you can transcend corruption and adopt the broader political reform agenda. And I said the following: if the president has had a road to Damascus movement on graft, he can do the same on other reform issues. Having done so, he might as well invite the opposition to form a government of national unity. There is, of course, no guarantee that the opposition would agree, but he would be able to work out some form of cooperation. This would be a lot of humble pie for the president to eat. Quite apart from the fact that humble pie never gave anyone indigestion, the payoffs are huge. It would neutralize URP without fighting it. It would give the president a meaningful agenda to deliver on, for if truth be told, the wheels have completely come off the Jubilee agenda. Digital hype can only go so far. It would take the political sting out of the referenda initiatives, and although a referendum may still be required to effect the reforms, he would be supporting, not opposing it. Electoral reforms would give him a shot at winning an untainted election. Even if he lost, his legacy would be secure. I wrote that in 2015. If you listen to that narrative, it sounds very much like the handshake.
Well, here on Point Blank, David Ndii is saying Uhuru Kenyatta is a culprit, but the author of his own misfortunes, and that it's time to man enough. If you're fighting Ruto, fight him politically. Don't fight him under the water. David Ndii will be back here at KTN News on Point Blank. Welcome to KTN News. This is Point Blank with Dr. David Ndii. Daktari, talking about political contests, Jomo Kenyatta had it out with Jaramogi Odinga and therefore re-entered KADU through Daniel Moi and Ronald Gala. When it reached Moi's period of power, when there was a problem and a vacuum, Moi got rid of Gigi Karaoke, and also Charles Jonjo, and several other important reshuffles were done in the Moi era for political survival. Then after that came Kibaki, and Kibaki was publicly to divorce Matere Kireri and Murungaru among the top people. In fact, by the end of his regime, near people like Muiraria were out of government and Martha Karua. And now we are here, the Uhuru Kenyatta government. And the only man he has ever sacked is Ekesa, a junior minister of sports. Now, when you are saying Uhuru has to be a man of bare knuckle politics, other than the advice you gave him on humble pie, doesn't he need to really have an iron fist? And just look at the history of the presidents who came before him, predecessors.
I don't know. I think people, if you look at suddenly the case of the circumstances you describe, I think the case of Kenyatta and what he did in the early 60s. Yes, he did it, but part of the problems you're experiencing are a product of that, their legacy of that sort of thing. If you look at Moi and Kibaki, where you're talking about dealing with people who are compromised, it was always very Machiavellian and in many times under extreme pressure. Yeah, you see, you let go your friends and under extreme pressure. So the question you want to ask, why did you have tainted people in the first place? So the more fundamental problem is that you need these people to get into power. Okay? And when you get into power, then the bargain you struck with them becomes a problem in governing.
But those who support Uhuru Kenyatta and those who are happy with the new politics surrounding the handshake and the politics within the handshake and immediately post the handshake are thinking that there has been a kind of an attempt to shake up the body politic. And there is a belief in the people out there that there is a possible progressive agenda that can be born out of this.
I don't think so.
And one of the arguments is that if the government was more inclusive and government was less owned, if you like, by the ICC persons, so it would perhaps allow or usher in a better and more honest debate.
This is what I read, that Uhuru is a prisoner of all the bargains he has struck for his own survival. He struck the ICC, the Ruto bargain, for his own survival of ICC. And I think that first term, there were lots of compromises. Those people he struck bargains with, the Kenyan state and society has paid a very heavy price. We do not know what pound of flesh many of those people, including foreign powers, have extracted, in order to extricate, for him to extricate himself out of that
Could I ask
problem. Let me come back to it. Then the second, including the corruption that, which is really fraud. Many of these people, a lot of this money, we are not asking the questions. When they opened the floodgates during the first term for NYS and all of that, where was that money going? Okay, that money was going to to fight political battles, quite a bit of it. Then the second one, bargain that he struck was the 2017 election.
And I want to come to that. David, I don't want to lose an important point. Point blank, I want to say to you, there are a lot of people that were saying that William Ruto is the acting president of Kenya. In fact, why I asked you about the expansion of the political space, for reasons you have said here, people found that Uhuru was passive, Uhuru was not doing what needed to be done. And underlying those who are looking for new people or new energy was the fact that Ruto had usurped executive power from Uhuru. So that, in other words, yes, by name, Uhuru was president. And I'm raising this because of the compromises that were brought in by ICC politics, where you had a co-presidency almost, where that everything you did, you have to do with your friend. And I'm asking, were there issues of a co-presidency? And was there the expansion of political space, an opportunity for Uhuru to free himself of those handcuffs if they were there?
No. I think what people are doing, and predominantly Kikuyus, is to ascribe to Uhuru a mission he doesn't have. A mission for Kenya. He doesn't have one. There is no evidence that Uhuru is in this for the people of Kenya. He is in this for himself, his family, his business associates, and the people he strikes deals with for self-preservation. So I have a different model. So because I use that lens, that this is pure self-interest, I do not struggle with the questions of whether he's held hostage or he's trying to fight corruption and he's unable. If that's the theory you're using, you're going to struggle. But if you use the theory that this is self-interest, and he works at, so ask himself, in his self-interest, what does firing people serve at this point in time?
But David, point blank,
it doesn't serve him anything.
I've heard you, and I think you've expounded your theory, but are you now just ignoring the fact that there is a big push to 2022? There is clearly two theories in the room. One, and the biggest one of all, is the Ruto takeover of the so-called Uhuru state, that has become so aggressive, intensified, and it seems acrimonious. I mean, you've had the president say Tanga in public. You've had the president...
Uhuru, that's why I said, if you let me, Uhuru struck this Faustian bargain with Ruto and with the Kalenjin elite so that they close ranks and fight the ICC. As part of that, he promised to hand power over to Ruto. Then they used the same alliance, and because it is hugely in Ruto's interest, to subvert the 2017 election. Then that did not go the way, and because of the response from NASA, it made the country literally ungovernable. Also, so Uhuru became a complete lapdog, okay? And Ruto was pushing to get for Uhuru to keep his end of the bargain.
But David,
okay, let me finish. So what do? They then reach out to Raila, okay, because there's a lot of discomfort. I was part of that process. There's a lot of discomfort within the Gikuyu and Uhuru support base about what Ruto now as a successor to Uhuru. So succession politics kicks in, lame duck kicks in, and governability kicks in because you've got an opposition out there. So let me finish. Yes. So what do you do? So what you see is a self-preservation strategy. And I see 3 pillars of that self-preservation strategy from the Uhuru side in the handshake. 1 was to demobilize the opposition. Okay? 2, neutralize Ruto. 3, restore the authority of the state and Uhuru's authority as a president, because that had been severely eroded. Those are the sort of things that you get from intelligence type service.
But what I am asking you point blank, Dave, and I know your theory is, well argued, but there's the other side of Uhuru. The fact that he was able to shake Baba's hand by the fact that there was that handshake, and there was already in the country the people's president, there was Uhuru. Obviously, there was a compromise on state authority. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he was able to do that, to achieve an environment not only to stabilize the country at the time, but to be able, as you say, to neutralize Ruto, must mean that he needed to neutralize Ruto. And I am putting it to you point blank, that whichever other motive Uhuru had, one of, it seems, his greatest motives in the handshake and beyond, particularly on this runaway corruption, is that there is more and more credibility coming out, that there's a part of his wing of the Jubilee government that is excessive. I'll give you an example. The other day there was this argument with the director of criminal investigation, claiming that he's investigating a matter and he's meant to be independent in the work that he's doing. And then the deputy president of the republic attacks his investigative capacity.
I gave an analogy.
Yes.
My first comment on the fighting corruption after the handshake. And it was still on KTN. I remember I was on a show with Oko, the Auditor General, and the government spokesman. And I said, fighting corruption has been weaponized for politics. And it is wrong to do so. And it is counterproductive. And I said, Ruto I gave an analogy of the Bible. What you're seeing is an effort to take the demon of corruption and put it in one person and throw him over the cliff to cleanse the system using Ruto. And I gave the analogy of the Bible, how Jesus took demons out of people and he put them in pigs, and the pigs went over the cliff. So Ruto and his people are the pigs.
David,
I am not saying that they have not done the things that they are being accused of. They have done that and more. But this was a collective strategy. It was done by the Jubilee government in its first term. These were the rewards that people are promised for political
So David,
support.
there are three things point blank in the room. Number one, we share a common brother, you and I. He's also called David. David Murathe cannot be mad to wake up in the morning and say, we don't want you in Jubilee. So Bwana Ruto, you and whatever it is, as Jubilee, you're not going to be our candidate. We don't want you. And he announces it on the roadside, knowing very well the repercussions of it in political. It was a political move. That wasn't a move on corruption. It was a political move.
Yes.
So I'm putting it to you that there has been obvious political moves, and those moves have had Ruto respond by having allies across the country who are pro-Ruto, answer Murathe in an exchange, and Murathe's allies and so on. So there is an honest, ongoing political battle telling Ruto clearly that there is a problem with the Kenyatta-led Jubilee with him. Secondly, there has been a handshake where the Raila Odinga's element that is coming in to work with Uhuru were not part of this setup of the state corruption, but have come in as well and are also loud, and they are very, very vocal against this Ruto group. So in other words, that itself is a different element. It is both political from people who are not necessarily beneficiaries of that. And thirdly and finally, there's a situation where everything is targeted toward a possible referendum, which, as you say, is an attempt to alter the 2010 constitution again for what? And as we go on, we will discuss the referendum. But there are 3-4 clear political moves that are not Uhuru only orchestrated. They're orchestrated intra the Jubilee Union and outside the Jubilee.
A friend of mine who is a close associate of Uhuru, one of his very close associates, people like David, David is an old friend of mine, we go back a long way, told me something interesting another day. He told me his mother asked him, okay? He asked him, why did you cheat Ruto? He asked him, why did you cheat Ruto? And he had no answer. Okay? He had no answer. So that is the situation. I told you, I read for you what I wrote in 2015,
yes,
that this battle was fighting Ruto. I did not write that from the blue.
Yes.
I had conversations with people people close to Uhuru, the government, and they were hyperventilating. This narrative about Ruto was already is a narrative they were creating. It's a sort of legitimizing narrative of themselves. Yet at the time, I could see a lot of corruption on their side and a lot of corruption on Ruto's side, but they were only seeing a Ruto type of corruption. So I defined it,
yeah,
I characterized it as a difference of table manners. It is not a difference of corruption.
One thing, David,
it's a difference of table manners.
One thing I know about you, you're intellectually honest. So I know you'll be honest. George Saitoti had the same problems. The late George Saitoti was arguably one of the most formidable presidential candidates. But corruption became the thing that defined him. And for better or for worse, the labeling of him, the Goldenberg trials, the ministry, all that stuck with Saitoti till his death. even when he was launching the biggest presidential bid in 20, just before, he died. So what I'm asking is this, because you see, I'm not just saying that with the level of his guilt or innocence, but the political machination 3 years to 2022 about William Ruto.
You see, the problem we have in Kenya is we have not solved the problem of transfer of power. It's a very important part of political development. There were 2 elections in Africa last week, presidential elections. Which one and which one? There were 2 presidential elections. Which one and which one? Do you know?
You were saying?
In Africa, there were 2 presidential elections last week.
Last week, Nigeria?
Yes, and the other, and which one else?
I think there was Nigeria. I forget the next one.
Exactly, you are guessing. There was a presidential election in Nigeria. There was a presidential election in Senegal.
Yes, it's Senegal, yes.
The presidential election in Senegal was completely uneventful. It was done. Macky Sall won a second term, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's non-event. Nigeria, the noise is still going on. So Senegal is one of those small group of club of African countries that has solved the problem of transfer of power. And political order, the most fundamental things in political order are 2. A government with legitimacy, the thing I was talking about, and is able to do things and is accepted by all people, and it can give orders and they are implemented. And a system of transfer of power, because it's at the point of transfer of power that is a critical failure of the state. That's when civil wars break. That's when all sorts of things happen. Now, there are 2 stable methods of transferring power that have worked in the world. Okay? One is dynasties, which is hereditary power, monarchies, and all sorts of things, because it solves a problem. You just say the successor to the king will be his son or his daughter, his eldest son or his daughter. And if, in failing that, the next one, the next one, the next one. So if there is any infighting for power, it only happens in the palace court where sons and daughters are heirs are poisoning and stabbing each other. But the society is insulated from that maneno. The second one is elections. Okay? Now, we have refused to make elections work. Because we have refused to accept elections as a method of transfer of power, what you're seeing and the things you are talking about are the sort of intrigues, palace intrigues, that undeveloped political systems have when it comes to transfer of power from especially dictatorships. Because in the end, if you think about the dictatorship, like what's happened in Mugabe, you know, the dictator, what's happening in Algeria, what's happening in Sudan, what will happen in Uganda and Rwanda. Okay, how it ended for Mobutu. Yeah, solving the problem of transfer of power is very, very important. And until we recognize that, we will remain a politically fragile, probably failing nation state.
I wanted to bring you back to the issue of the conflict that will ensue between now and 2022. And I have heard the explanation, but I can say to you that the political games are going on nevertheless.
Yeah.
And they are going on in earnest.
Yes.
And the groupings are becoming clearer to the day. In fact, the courage of the deputy president has increased to the point that he defies the president at Chatham House. He gives a statement, for example, on his vision on the constitution, completely different from what the president's views will be. For example, stands up, takes on players within state institutions, and is telling his people, there's an outcry from the region that this is a target to stop me. So what you have is a president who's been told by his deputy, whichever your interest, whether it's to protect the things you say he's there to protect or to do anything else. Me, William Ruto, you're keeping me out, and everything you're doing, including labeling this on me, including bringing the handshake, this is a way of stopping me. So I'm at war with you. And I'm saying to you that in the art of war, when somebody is weak, they flee. When they are strong, they offer battle. And my question is this: does William Ruto feel now that he's strong enough to take on Uhuru Kenyatta, whatever Uhuru Kenyatta's motives are? Because clearly, say it any way we want, point blank, there is a head-to-head contest.
There's no one in control. There's no one in charge. Uhuru is a lame duck. There's an underlying ethnic dynamic that can be mobilized. There is an anti-Kikuyu sentiment that can be whipped up and mobilized. So there's a huge arsenal. There's money, which both of them have a plenty. Yeah. There is all manner of things. There is corruptible security forces and ethnically divided. There is a whole political arsenal that can be unleashed. Because what they're playing, you call in game theory the game of chicken. Yeah, brinkmanship. Because now that Uhuru has declared war and tried to humiliate his deputy by calling him Tanga and all manner of things, then they have raised the stakes. They can no longer countenance.
And Morales' move has made Jubilee dead.
They cannot countenance him succeeding them.
Yes.
So it's like this: if Ruto runs and loses, he will most likely be destroyed. They have to destroy him. He will most certainly be bankrupted and probably sent to jail. So his stakes are very high to go for broke. If, on the other hand, he wins, these dynasties fear that he will also destroy them. Okay? So you have these two warlord-type forces in the state, and they will fight. Will they fight to the question is, will they fight to the death, or will they all compromise in the interest of self-preservation? I am betting on a compromise in the interest of self-preservation, that by the time they are through with all these rituals of constitution and they have managed to pull out William Ruto's political clause, that's what I think they're trying to do, to contain him, up to the point where his best sort of scenario would be one of cutting a deal and he becomes something within whatever coalition configuration that they are going to come with. So the situation is either we have a duel to the death between the two sort of warlord camps, or at some point they both sort of pull back from the brink, and none of them they both swab, as we do in the game of chicken, and then they cut a deal. But it could all go horribly wrong.
Well, Dr. David Ndii has said here on Point Blank that Uhuru Kenyatta and DP William Ruto are at war. The art of war says that if you are weak, you should flee from your enemy. And if you are strong, you should offer battle. And if you are stronger, you should crush the enemy. What will happen in the Uhuru-Ruto standoff? Will it be a full-out war, or will there ever be a compromise? To find out more, come back to Point Blank, only on KTN News with Dr. David Ndii. Welcome back to Point Blank with Dr. David Ndii here on KTN News. David, as we wind up the subject of the Kenyan politics and maybe look beyond these borders, there is even now talk of some people within the anti-Ruto group calling for his resignation as deputy president. There is another group that is pro-Ruto calling for the dissolution of this government if it has no longer confidence in its partners and for all this. And you say in your last word in this segment, that this to you is just posturing, and how do you see anybody here blinking between now and the referendum?
You know, let me clarify something about this referendum language. You know, before the handshake, we had been asked very many times whether we are willing to talk to Jubilee. And we had said, we will talk to Jubilee at some point, because this is a political dispute. And that's the way you end up political disputes. Even war ends in conversation, isn't it, at some point. And we had our own proposals of what a roadmap to resolve that conflict about 2017 was going to be. And our roadmap, which we said we are willing even to go into government with Jubilee, but we are not going to do a kamui stay, nusumkate like last time. If we do that route, it has to be something which is endorsed by the public. And we had proposed a transitional government. And that transitional government was going to be formed using a constitutional instrument, so that it can have a different configuration from the one we have now. That government was going to then govern for the rest of the term and midwife the transition to a new structure of executive, which is one of the things we thought we should change. And it was going to then lead up and the electoral reforms and all the things we needed to do before we get to 2022, so that we do not have a repeat of 2017. Now, the referendum we were talking about at the time was a referendum on that constitutional instrument, so as to create a transitional government. So now, if we had followed that script, yeah, and I do not know whether actually Raila put that on the table in the conversation about the handshake, because those conversations were secret. We would have a transitional government now with a different configuration. Ruto would be in it, because there was no point. I mean, you see, and I have asked this question, and I kept asking this question subsequently, okay? Uhuru and Raila, they promised to unite the country. If you read the handshake document that they wrote, it talks about uniting the country and going back to where the rain started beating us, and how this started with their fathers, and they want this problem to end with them. As soon as they finish the handshake and they are going to unite the country, Uhuru comes out and starts like 5 wars. He starts a war on corruption. He starts a war on riparian buildings. They start a war on tax fraud. They start a war on consolidators of cargo. They are at war with everybody. Now you ask, is it unity or war? Because you cannot do both at the same time. Okay? So our roadmap was one where we focus on the thing which got us into the problems we are immediately, which is electoral injustice. Okay? Now, if they had done that, instead of starting these wars, the question of fighting Ruto politically would not arise. Ruto would be fought politically by the 2022 election. But now, once they did the handshake and the temperature went down, I think Uhuru and his people decided that the problem was over. They can enjoy power without compromise, and they are now reaping the whirlwind.
Now, let me talk to you about the public debt. You have written extensively about the fact that you think we are overextended as a nation vis-a-vis the loans we have taken, the proportion of the money that you think is going to development and that's going to recurrent expenditure. In a brief bird's eye view, you have, your views on this are fairly, where are we in terms of the ratio of debt?
We are in what I call a debt treadmill. We are in a fiscal straitjacket and a debt treadmill. We cannot move, because this year we are probably going to raise about 1.4 trillion shillings in revenue. Okay? Debt service is about 1 trillion. Okay, it's just close to 1 trillion. Of that, 400 is interest. 400 billion is interest, which is in your recurrent. Okay? The other, you can roll over. But what happens is that the timing of the rolling over when you are raising money to refinance does not always coincide with when the money, the principal are due, the amortization is due. So what happens is that you then have to dip into your cash flow to pay off. So you take salaries money to amortize, to pay the principal as you await your new syndicated loans, because now it looks like we are unable to go back to the Eurobond market because the markets have changed and our macroeconomics have changed and our politics is unstable, so our sovereign risk has gone up. Okay, so that is the problem we are in. I think the best thing is to use an analogy of Ethiopia. This is exactly where Ethiopia got. And realize that by the time Ethiopia was changing its political leadership, if you listen to Desalegn, he has now said, I resigned so as to make it possible to undertake reforms. They got to a point where they had no fuel, no foreign exchange. They were already defaulting on debt because they went into a huge building program on borrowed money. They have not finished the project and the loans are due. So that's exactly the same situation we are in.
Now, coming to mwananchi wa kawaida, I wanted, you've described this to me before in private in a way that I hope Kenyans will understand it here. When we were discussing with you about the proletariat, and we were talking about the bourgeoisie, the working class and the peasantry, the Kenyan mwananchi has never been able to come together. You are saying because the labor force or the labor movements have never been very strong. In terms of the labor force of today, the mwananchi today, when you look back, how many are small business operators in the
You know, we have, that's a point I have tried to make and people have not, when you use the framework, which was the point I was making, when you use the European framework of politics, which is labor versus capital, but that has its own context because if you go to the Western world, most people are wage earners. They are employed by capitalists. So if you look at the UK, the Conservative Party is the party of capital, and the Labour Party is the Labour Party of workers. In fact, it's financed largely by unions. And they are able to strike a bargain between labor and capital, and that's why they are able to have ideology. Because capital has its ideology of profits and labor has its ideology of fairness and all manner of things. Now, if you come here, that's not what we have. Because what you have is an agrarian society where the vast majority of incomes, whether they are of small businesses or of farms or of large businesses, are profits. Farmers earn profits.
Yeah,
Matatus earn profits. Juakali people earn profits. So the only
hawkers, even hawkers
earn profits.
Yes.
So the only people who earn wages is public workers and the few people who work in the corporate private sector. If you look at the structure of the labor force, those people today are about 2.5 million. The people out there are about 20.
My Lord.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay? So you have a tail here. So, in fact, labor, then the interests of labor in Kenya are very different from the interests of labor in the UK. In fact, there is an economist, he left the country years ago, he was a Kenyan Mzungu. He called it the labor aristocracy.
I was coming across and I was seeing this border. And I remember our deep discussion. And I think now this other thing has been created, this monster called border. Doesn't follow any rules, they are not trained, but now they are another SME, another created profit.
There's about 1 million of them.
And they are everywhere.
You see, there's a tendency to conflate two things which are not the same thing. Again, people conflate capitalism and the market economy. Now, what Akina Uhuru do, their conglomerates, that is capitalism. What the border do is market economy. Free entry, free exit. In fact, capital does sometimes, what you have is labor hiring capital. Because the guy who's riding the border has hired it from somebody else. So it is not capital employing labor. It is labor employing capital.
Now, David, I wanted to ask you your view. Both of you, us who are studying the UK, and what's going on with Brexit at the moment. To what extent is it going to affect Africa, and for that matter, countries like Kenya, either in the next month or two, whether the UK will live with a no deal or will live with some form of a deal to negotiate a better European terms? Are there immediate impacts to Africa, to us?
I don't think so. I was actually asked that question about 2 years ago by Chatham House, and I wrote for them a small piece. And I remember the title of the piece. I told them, Europe, for us, Europe is the past, not the future. And that past is not entirely pleasant. Yeah, because what you're seeing in Brexit and what you're seeing in the US with Trump and all this,
because I'm asking that for a reason. Because with Trump, Africa is no longer a priority. Certainly, Kenya will not have any special friend in.
We should not be anybody's priority.
Yes. I'm looking and saying that the challenges we are facing here are going to increasingly be inward. Just looking at the new world order, there seems to be enough problems at home for them.
You see, what we are seeing is the end of the imperial era, which colonized us. You know, we were part of that tale, and that's how we are Kenya, because we are just products of European imperialism. And what we are seeing is the same people, the same European imperialists got together because of communism and decided to unleash globalization. But when they unleashed globalization, they thought it was going to work for them. So like the old Roman Empire, you know, they built roads to go out and conquer and to send troops to the provinces. But there's the same roads that are used to come and sack Rome. So these people, they unleashed globalization, and they were not prepared for the blowback. Particularly from the so-called developing countries, because what you're doing is you are now creating a kind of level playing field. But the old imperial system was always based on them having an advantage. Yes. They think it was not based on being competitive. It was based on using political muscle.
Because I'm saying, if you look at DRC Congo, and you look at now what happened the other day, what is going on in South Africa, and all that is going on, you have a situation where you have to ask a question. Is it that the influence of the West is reducing? And properly so, because that looking forward, people should not think there's a wine, you know, is it called a wine that will come somehow to sort out whatever issues?
Yeah, it is. That's what I'm saying. If you go back, you go to the internet, you will find some graphics looking at the global economic power, how it has evolved over the last 200 years. And you find that 200 years ago, the biggest economies in the world were India and China. And then they were squeezed out in the West, first Britain and then the US, because of imperialism. They squeezed them out. They then end up the West controlling about 40% of global output. And now, since this wave of globalization, the old order is restoring itself. China and India are soon going to be the world's biggest economies because they have the biggest population, because in a free trading world, with free movement of capital, ideas, and all of these things, the size of the economies should be proportional to the population.
Now, David, I needed to just pick your brain on the referendum, and I'm not saying whether you have really finalized your viewpoint on it, but just broadly on the referendum. If you look at the Boma's draft, what existed before, there was an idea there about counties being reduced to about 15. There was an issue of there being a parliamentary system of government to help in accountability, bringing the executive to parliament. There was an idea then about devolution being the main element of appropriating state power. What is it that is fatally wrong in the 2010 Constitution that, from a Mwananchi's point of view, needs to be highlighted as opposed to what may interest the political class, in your view?
Those are good ideas. They're in our manifesto. If you look at the NASA manifesto, we titled it A Strong Nation. And we say that we are the coalition of the Constitution. The people who took over power are the people who are against the Constitution. So we are going to, running on a platform to be able to implement it and propose changes to the things that we think that are wrong. Now, one of those things is we think the presidential system is not suitable for multinational states. What we call ethnically sort of very divided societies, because they are, and we have argued. There is a book we did with Raila, it's his name, just before the election, and we present all the evidence showing why parliamentary systems are more stable than presidential systems, particularly in societies like ours. Two, there are things which, for instance, the gender problem, inclusivity problem, which again failed in parliament, is something that could be easily fixed with a mixed proportional representation type system. And I have actually proposed very many times that the way to fix this thing is to collapse the constituencies at the county level, so that Nairobi keeps its 17 constituencies, but they are contested. There's 17 MPs, not constituencies. You get rid of the constituencies, you keep the 17 MPs, but they are contested in a proportional representation system using a party list, where on the party list, every third person must be of the alternate gender. So you do end to keep. No, you see, there is a whole proportional representation system. Yes. But say we don't go the whole hog.
Oh, not the whole, yes.
You have it county-based. So that Kiambu has so many MPs, and you have a proportional representation for Kiambu only. Murang'a for Murang'a only. Nairobi for Nairobi only. So that it's not national party list, but it's a county party list. And that would actually resolve quite a lot of problems.
David, do you actually believe in the caliber of cabinet? Because I've had this argument of having MPs become cabinet members. So that, yes, that's one part, as you've said, of MPs. But the other thing that has been argued about the parliamentary system is that the cabinet secretaries would be MPs and reside in parliament. Yeah. And I often wonder, in this country and the way people elect, you can see some of the governors, my friend, people elect here.
Listen, you are not, the purpose, again, this idea, you're back to administrative state. Looking at people's CVs. There's no political system which develops that way. Okay? If the way it develops, if you want good people and you're a political party, you bring them into your political party. In the UK, people who a party want to become ministers are assigned safe seats. Okay, so the system has a way of dealing with it. The problem with the presidential system, there's a wonderful paper written by somebody called Juan Litz, called The Perils of Presidentialism. And the problem with the presidential system is a one-man show. If you look at, like for instance, let's take a case of Ethiopia. Ethiopia was able to change leadership within the EPDRF without an election. Okay? Australia does it all. South Africa was able to bring down Zuma without an election. That is what a parliamentary system enables you to do. It enables you to have political instability within the political class without that destabilizing society. Italy, all these countries have this sort of,
David,
the leadership, the point is,
yes,
the leadership can be made more accountable. The question of saying that you appoint technocrats, it can be abused. That's exactly what Uhuru Kenyatta did. He appointed people without authority who could not challenge him, yes men and women, and that's exactly where we are. If you recall, to give you an example, when Nyachai was made finance minister, he went to Kasarani and said country was broke, which people found completely whatever. And he was fired, and he went on and even ran for president. Because if you are a minister in a parliamentary system, you have your own independent power base. Yeah? Yes. So there have been reasons. But let me come back to the question of those are good ideas. But this is the wrong time to do it, and these are the wrong people to do it because they're doing it for the wrong reason.
Would a parliamentary system be cheaper to run than a presidential system? Does it have any financial?
These cost manenos are indifferent. They do not depend on the system. They depend on your financial discipline. Any system can be as expensive as you want. It can be as cheap as you want. As we are speaking, right now, the budget of the presidency is more than double the budget of all the constitutional commissions put together, 9 billion. It has risen from about 3 billion when Uhuru came to power. It is now about 9 billion the last time I looked. The budget for the constitutional commissions have only risen from about 4 billion to 5 billion. It's not a question of a system.
Finally, this issue of MCAs, this bloated miniature governments.
They are not bloated. We reduced in the new constitution the tiers of government from 7 to 2. We had over 3,000 councillors. We now have only about 1,500 elected MCAs. Because remember, in the local government, we had town counties, county councils, all sorts of councils. True?
Yes.
And they all had their administrative conduct. Mm. In the provincial administration, we had everything from presidency to province. We had created region. We had district. The provincial administration people, DCs, DOs, and all those people alone were almost 8,000. If you take the offices that the Constitution abolished and the offices it created, the offices it created are about half the offices it abolished. Those are the counter-reform narratives I was talking about.
Except the woman reader. You would agree with me?
No. The offices, if you take the total number, it is because it was badly designed, but the question of inclusion and gender representation is absolute. That's not negotiable. It's a question of how you do it. But you must have an inclusive National Assembly. The point I'm making is if this system is supposed to be cheaper than the old system. But what has happened is that you've got people in government who are not committed to it. So they've been trying to claw back power to the center, and they have refused to restructure the provincial administration.
Well, you've been watching Point Blank with Dr. David Ndii. And Niccolo Machiavelli said that politics is half skill and half fortune. Dr. Ndii has said there is an ongoing battle between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy William Ruto. Where will fortune fall? Where will skill fall? As Machiavelli said. Welcome to KTN next week here at Point Blank on KTN News.
Point Blank by TG was filmed on location at the Nairobi Serena Hotel.